Good afternoon. Thank you for coming from my members and members of the public as well. Very warm welcome to a beautiful day in Parramatta. So it's the first time I'm addressing as a president in the area of Parramatta for me this year and the last year. So apologies for the slight delay. Traffic, that's a problem. I think you can imagine in the year 2035 we can be flying to Parramatta instead of driving down Parramatta Road or along the highway. So I think there are opportunities that our Shadow Minister can tell us about his views of where digital is taking us and the improvement in our lifestyle. So before I start, to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the people of the Daru Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd like to welcome the Honourable Ed Husic, Member MP, Shadow Minister for the Digital Economy, and the Shadow Minister for Employment Services, Workforce, Participation, and the Future Work. All the topics that I'm personally very excited about. So welcome, Shadow Minister. And Ed will be addressing us about the digital economy and the plans for the opposition. Also with us today, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Ms. Julie Owens, MP, the federal member for Parramatta. So we're actually on her territory. So very warm welcome. I think it's your first time to attend an ACS function. Julie is also the Shadow Assistant Minister for Small Business, Citizenship and Multicultural Australia. Very warm welcome. Do we have any other guests that members of the Parramatta City Council? We're not here today. We also, I believe, are members of the branch executive for New South Wales. Nisha, welcome. Also, any other branch executive? Welcome. And also, welcome. And so a lot of new faces, even I haven't met. So good to meet you. Also, I used to work with Sonia here, so at the Department of New South Wales Department of Finance. So she was looking after me when I was the ICT Advisory Chair for New South Wales on the panel. So very warm welcome to Sonia. And Sonia just helped with the data sharing task force that we just released our data sharing framework just 2 weeks ago with Minister Dominello and the National Treasurer. So just a bit about Ed. Prior to his parliamentary career, Ed worked for a number of key ministers, both state and federal, and as a senior advisor and held numerous senior roles within the union movement. And I believe Ed was sworn in October 2016 as the Shadow Minister for Digital Economy. And he also, as I mentioned, holds a number of portfolios. So I'm personally looking forward to seeing him to join us at one of our government panels at the upcoming ACS Reimagination Summit on the 2nd of November at the Star in Sydney. So just put that in your calendar. It's the third year we've been running that. It's a very exciting event. It goes for most of the day and the evening with the dinner and the awards. So I personally am very excited about it and look forward to hear from Ed about his plan on the government panel as well. Working with the ACS, working on with all parts of the government machinery, we work with both the opposition and the current government in many things, and I'm very excited today to host the viewpoint of the opposition. I know Ed and the oppositions are very committed to digital economy, to the workforce and to education, because during my first term president, I worked under Labor government and worked closely with then the Senator, Councillor Conroy on NBN. So we also hosted the first technology debate at the National Press Club on the NBN itself. So that was an exciting time. So I'd love to hear from Ed today about what his plans are. Most of you know in May 2017, ACS released our report, the Digital Pulse, which we work with Deloitte, Access Economics, and some of the key statistics I'd like to share with you prior to Ed's presentation. We all know that the ICT exports has increased by 12% to $2.8 billion in the year 2015-2016. So overall, the digital economy and our service exports for the Australian economy are aiming towards 7% of our GDP. So when we look at in the year 2020, we'll be looking at $139 billion as a contribution to Australia's GDP. So I'm personally excited about this sector. It's a source sector in terms of employment. The employment for ICT workers definitely looks very rosy. And it's predicted to grow by 2% by 2022. When compared that with the average general workforce, which is only 1.4%. So that's 0.6% higher than the general workforce. So we've seen the numbers of ICT workers growing from 640,000 in 2016 to a forecast by 2022 to 720,000. So these are very exciting times. Also, we've seen great convergence of technology like artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud computing, IoT, internet, blockchain, you name it, and robots, they're all happening. And last night I was having dinner with the Minister of Innovation and ICT from Western Australia, the Honourable Dave Kelly. He spoke to the Western Australian branch at the University of Western Australia Club, another exciting event about what Western Australia is looking to do as well in terms of this space. So most governments are working very hard to drive on this agenda. I know personally, because I've been talking to Minister Lauren Moss from the Northern Territory. She's now currently working on conducting a survey with our members and the members and across Northern Territory and also the Northern Territory citizens about how to improve government services to its community, including the remote and to the Aboriginal community. So it's a very exciting time for us in the industry. It's certainly a very exciting time for ACS, so I look forward to hear what Ed's got to say about his plans for the digital economy. So on that note, Ed, most welcome and welcome you to the podium to talk about your plans.
Thank you very much. This is the most substantive lectern I've ever spoken on. I feel like at some point I might be able to have a lie down if this gets too tough during the Q&A. But thank you for hosting us here today, Anthony. It is a pleasure to be with you again and to recognise we're on Darug land and to pay respects to elders past and present. If I can also just welcome my colleague, Julie Owens. Julie is an exceptionally energetic local MP. I often say, and she will probably not thank me for this reference, I do not think that there is a door in this electorate that does not have Julie's DNA on it. She has door-knocked every door and place across her electorate. There are about 100,000 voters in a federal electorate, so this is not a small feat, not just once, but probably over her career 3 times, roughly. 4? Am I going the wrong way or the right way?
Well, if it wasn't a redistribution, at least 2, but I
there you go.
half of Bennelong and half of Greenway.
So not just Parramatta, but other electorates as well. So that shows you how energetic. But as local members that is one thing. But the other reason why I'm particularly happy that Julie is here, because in her role as Shadow Assistant Minister for Small Business, it is not just on this instance that Julie's been involved, but previously, but especially with a focus on what can be done with digital engagement with small businesses, how we can actually use innovation to drive better business climates for smaller and medium enterprises. And so it is terrific that Julie can be here, because I imagine with a lot of ministers and shadow ministers coming through, there is always a call on Julie to come along, and I'm particularly pleased that she's here tonight because we both share that interest. Anthony mentioned a number of times that I'd be talking to you about our policies leading into the election. It was like by the third time I was thinking, okay, I'm getting strong-armed here. I'm going to be doing an early release of policies. It's going to be very hard for me to walk away from this, but I'm going to try to, because we are in the phase of policy development itself, and we'll obviously be releasing policy over, particularly the course of the next 12 months. I think we're going to an election, given that we have to recalibrate the House and Senate election cycles. Do not be surprised if within the next 12 months we go. So you'll see a lot of policy then. But I did want to take the opportunity to give you a sense of what drives, or what is likely to drive our thinking in terms of policy development, and also to, I guess, in a sense, reinforce why we still think this is an important topic to talk about in a climate where there seems to have been a vacating of the field. We went from talking all things innovation to now not discussing it. It seems to have now morphed, if I'm to consider the recent utterings of the federal government. Innovation and the ideas boom has morphed to talking all things digital economy. I noticed today the Minister for Communications, Mitch Fifield, started talking about the digital economy. We have a digital economy consultation paper that's out, and there's been this attempt to try and restart the conversation. But I am going to argue tonight, without getting too political, it needs to be argued on the basis of a genuine commitment about driving policy in a very concrete, deliberate way, rather than doing it as a slogan or an advertising gesture or something that can get us through the next news cycle. We have suffered enough from this in times past. This has to actually become, as I will argue, a core component or a national economic priority for a host of reasons that I want to discuss through my contribution today. It's been 12 months, as Anthony, I'm grateful that you highlighted, that I'd had the portfolio added of digital economy plus future of work. So 12 months. I sought deliberately to get those portfolios included within my portfolio space, because I genuinely believe we cannot afford to not be talking about how Australia, with all the smarts we have here, is not driving this national debate in relation to innovation, in relation to our own tech sector, in relation to the skills that we have here, and the importance both to the economy and the way we function as a nation and communities through the use of tech. The bigger thing on the horizon is the whole impact the technology is going to have, and as many of you already know, in terms of work, the shape of work into the future. And so there are a number of things I wanted to touch on. The future of work, the challenge to business, because I think really we are seeing, concerning problems on two levels, from an SME perspective on digital engagement and corporate Australia and the way it's engaging in the whole automation space. So future of work, business, government as a leader, and also regional engagement and building collaboration beyond the nation, but in particular to a group of countries to our north that would be exceptionally keen to work with us, particularly within ASEAN. So I want to be able to finish on that. But in saying all this, apart from what I thought was important in terms of the addition of digital economy to my portfolio area, I wanted to give you a sense of why I've been so interested in tech for so long. And Anthony mentioned the shocking revelation that as a Labor MP, prior to entering Parliament, I was a union official. And I'm so glad you're sitting for this, because this comes as a shock to many people that so many Labor MPs were former union officials. The joke worked much better in my head, much better. There you go. Anyhow, I worked for a union that I often described had sunrise and sunset within it. The sunrise was for all those telco workers. It was the Communications, Electrical and Plumbing Union. All those telco workers who could see with the rollout of broadband that they would get, that their work for the longer term would be secure. Wasn't always the case. When I first joined the Communications Union, it was at the tail end of the 90s, just as Telstra was ready to privatise. We had a workforce go from 90,000, roughly, to 30,000. Some of it due to privatisation, but largely because, just down the road from here, when I visited the Parramatta Exchange on Church Street, that exchange went from being a multi-floor facility through the process of miniaturisation of the tech. You could just see the collapsing of all that equipment. And in the end, they didn't need it anymore. All those techs that used to be employed within Telstra are gone. All those people, and there are a few faces here that I think will remember this reference when we used to have what was called white pages and yellow pages, and all the people that were employed behind that. Or when you rang someone to get a phone number. Yes, for the live stream, if they haven't fallen out from shock yet, we used to do that. All these things changed, and so all these roles changed as well. But as broadband and as obviously the internet became more pervasive, those jobs changed. However, the other half of the union that I represented, when Ahmed Fahua, when he had just become MD of Australia Post, showed me a graph and said, see this, where one line's going up and one line's going down. The line that's going up is broadband penetration in the US, and the line that's going down is mail volumes. And attached to those mail volumes are jobs, people's lives. So for me, when I talk about the future of work, I talk about it from seeing what technological change did to a workforce. I'm actually a Labor MP who says to you, we need to embrace automation, which sounds crazy, but the reality is this. Ask yourself fundamentally, is this change something we can avoid? We can ignore. If we put our head in the sand, it will pass us by and we'll be safe. And you know the answer to that question, which I pose rhetorically. So the next point is, what do we do? What is manageable? We know this is coming, so the next response is preparedness. And for me, it's realising that, that moment when, as I've said publicly elsewhere, the needle goes from awe to anxiety when people think about what technology does, and saying, okay, we know there's a concern. We know that 3.5 million Australian jobs will be impacted upon by automation between now and 2030. In a workforce, in an Australian labour workforce, that's roughly 12 million. We know there's going to be impacts, but it's important for us to talk about this because hiding from it is not going to stop this. Secondly, we can manage this. And thirdly, it's important that as much as automation will have an impact, there are two other A's worth bearing in mind. There is augmentation and there is addition. There will be some jobs will go, some tasks will change, and new tasks potentially be added, and new roles potentially added as well. Though I think, quite frankly, it's useless to try and predict what those new jobs are because anyone here who could tell me that they knew an Uber driver 5 years ago in Sydney, there are so many roles now that actually crop up that it's not necessarily the jobs we should predict, it's the skill sets that will be important in terms of the transition. So for me, future of work has been important, and I constantly harangue and hector on it because I was sitting 12 months ago talking with venture capitalists and senior union leaders in different parts of the country, in different rooms, all asking the same thing, what are we doing about the future of work? And there's no answer. And my concern is that in not having the answer, that the anxiety, the concern, and the temptation for governments who don't have an answer to pull a regulatory handbrake or to come up with some sort of short-sighted response is the wrong long-term answer to the nation. So, I think when you look at it in terms of future work perspective, you have a tendency to look at it from the employee perspective, which is very important. But there's another element to it as well, and that's business. The reason why I wanted to mention business is this: SMEs. You would know. SMEs in this country have very low levels of digital engagement. This has been the case for many years. This is not anything new. When I look at some of the stats themselves, probably less than 50% have like an e-purchase platform, less than 40% using social media, less than 20%, I think it is off the top of my head, that are using some cloud-based platform to improve their business. 40% 20% in terms of cloud-based. So this is at a time where we know that by digitally engaging, they can not only operate more efficiently, but potentially reach new customers. And we've had this. We've then had a whole lot of people, when I look at the issue around Amazon, where people have now thrown their hands up in the air. Amazon's coming. The hordes are going to come over. As has been pointed out by Harvey Norman, apparently Australian retail will be decimated, and that's the end of things. Now, there have been obviously good reasons as to why people think about the power of Amazon. Some of the stats are truly staggering. 85% of mobile users in the US tapping into Amazon. This figure, 2.7% of all digital time, this is from the US, spent on the Amazon store. Like, think about it, 2.7% of all the users of mobiles are online looking at Amazon. It's a huge figure. And Morgan Stanley predicted retail earnings would drop here by 16% when Amazon arrives. MYOB research showing 27% of SMEs here were worried about the arrival of Amazon. 43% believe it'll lead to lost customers. 43% think Amazon setting up virtual shops will reduce revenue. But this is the stat I'd like to leave you with. 57% of them think the arrival of Amazon would force them to innovate. 57%. Now, that on the one hand is a good thing, but why did we wait so long? We knew this is coming. This is the era of platforms. These are major platforms moving in on so many levels. I'm not just talking about retail. Amazon of itself is a marketplace. It'll obviously sell its own product, but it gives SMEs the chance to sell their own product on that platform. But just like Facebook is a platform, be it for ideas and content. These platforms are moving in. We had them analog, they're now digital. This world is changing, and yet we're not. When we think about the world in terms of a change, paradigm, it's all negative. Well, no, the time is to prepare and actually take and squeeze out the maximum benefit for it. So, in a digital economy sense, when Anthony says that we'll, like in terms of the policy that we're thinking of, this, in my mind, is crucial about how we get small business to engage and engage better. Because this will be better for them, it'll be better for the broader economy. It has to happen. But the other element, instead of just thinking about SMEs, is big business. So in terms of big business, some of the work that has been done in this area has looked at, which, for instance, listed companies have publicly said what they're committing to in terms of investment in tech and automation and improving the way they operate through this. And then compared it to other listed companies in other countries. Switzerland is the world beater. 25% of the listed companies saying they're actively investing in automation and tech. In Australia, it's 9%. 9%. And again, I'm not arguing on the basis, as a Labor MP, arguing for automation knowing that the job impacts are there would sound obtuse, weird, odd. But the reason I think that we need to recognise this will be important is, at some point, if Australian businesses are dragging their feet on this, they will be looking at their rivals offshore who are starting to embrace this and can see the competitive and commercial advantages flowing from this. And then what happens? In the Australian context, there'll be a rush to play catch-up. And this is the worst thing because of the employment dislocation impact of that and not being prepared on the way through, which is why I say, we might as well be realistic about automation and technological change and the way that it'll impact on the Australian corporate sector and prepare for it. Otherwise, you're going to have people, for example, as has already been, may have already been familiar with this argument, someone who has made a lot of money out of tech in Bill Gates saying we should have a robot tax. If we're going to see all this change through automation, AI, robotics, machine learning, and you've got robots displacing people in work, and the person that was working, earning an income, paying taxes off that income, now replaced by a robot where the revenue isn't going to government, and businesses are reaping a commercial benefit as a result of that, why shouldn't we have a robot tax? Now, Anthony said I should announce policy tonight. I'm not announcing that. I'm not announcing that. But it goes to show you, doesn't it, that in the vacuum, the ideas that are put forward to get people thinking and to spur them into action. And this is what I think these arguments are doing. They are forcing corporate Australia to think, what are you doing to prepare in terms of workforce development? I'll ask quietly, or within four walls of areas I meet with corporate Australia, saying, what are you doing to prepare? Or if you're not, in all fairness, who do you think's doing it right? And they won't have an answer. That's a problem in itself. This is why the Bill Gates run these things, these arguments, because they don't see any evidence of this preparedness. And corporate Australia's got it within them. The easiest thing for me as a Labor MP is to come here as a shadow minister and bag out corporate Australia. I'll leave that for another time. But for now, they do have it within them. We've been through this change, but the test is to see how to get ready for it. Now, I'm not, as much as I'm trying to be optimistic about it, I think there is a challenge generationally within the boardrooms of this country, where you've got people who've been around for a long time who it doesn't necessarily gel in their minds that this era that is approaching us, they need to prepare for. They don't see the urgency. Younger board members or younger members of management teams do get it. You have an important role in making sure they do get it. In actual fact, I'd argue the ACS has a crucial role in spurring digital literacy and improvements in digital literacy in two key groups: business people and politicians. And I'll come to the politicians bit in a minute. But in terms of business people, getting them to recognise that having digital literacy is going to be a core competency in the years ahead. Vivek Kundra, who used to be in the Obama administration, now on Salesforce, who I had the opportunity to meet with probably 18 months ago, he said to me, one of the best indicators of whether or not a company is going to go well and survive in what's coming is if one of their board members comes from tech, is what he was saying. Because he said that person is going to encourage the others to skill up. I think that's a really important point worth bearing in mind in future years. So that will be important too. So I've talked from the workforce angle, the business angle, government. Now, Anthony was very polite in mentioning the presence of the Treasurer, and I think it is important the Treasurer attend ACS events and the economic ministers do. I must say I raised an eyebrow when I saw the comments reported, and it could be wrong, that said the Treasurer had indicated that tech needed to spell out the benefits of the tech sector, needed to spell out its benefits and strengths. The tech sector needed to do that. There's always a case for the sector to do this. But from a government that has stopped talking about innovation because it couldn't get its own backbenchers to explain why innovation was an important economic priority for the country, I think is massively unfair to the tech sector to say the job's yours to do. This is not. It's all of us to do. Not just in terms of one particular party or the other, but in terms of government, business and community, getting ready for the change ahead. And then to see, after we've stopped talking about innovation, to see a digital economy paper that says opening up the conversation. Well, we didn't stop talking about it. We didn't stop thinking about it. The government did, and I'm not going to be too political tonight, but I am going to make the pointed remark, because if they stop talking about it, they stop thinking about it, and if they're not thinking about it, they're not acting about it, right? And this is why I think, this is good in itself, but a lot of it, when I go in there, talks about the importance of regulatory structures and talks about the way in which government should be working there. That's all great for government. Regulation is not the sole pathway to ensuring that we become a digital economy, and I'm sure a lot of you would privately agree. So, from their perspective, they do need to have a leadership role in this. From our side of politics, this is why Chris Bowen earlier this year went back to the Sydney, the Australian startup community, and said, this is going to be one of our national economic priorities, and has spelled out the importance of this, and we will continue to drive this. In fact, Chris's first major budget and response speech in 2014 put innovation centrally within our policy platform in terms of our agenda itself, and said this is going to be a way to help get the economy transition and grow from the funk that it's in. So it's very important from our point of view to do that. It's also important for government to show leadership so that when we talk to SMEs and say the value of digital transformation is huge, that we do it off a successful platform. And we haven't had that, in the government sphere, given the number of incidents we've had, be it ATO, census, NAPLAN, child support, robo-debt. I don't want to go on because it'll turn into a therapy session. But this is a problem. If government can't show that digital transformation can be done because its value is important, well, then this is a problem. See, this is what happens when you have an enthusiastic speaker. You don't need to see that photo of me anyway. And it also reminds me I have to get an updated profile pic, so I don't want that. But if I can make this point, in terms of the way in which digital transformation is done, regardless of which party is in, there are, as you would rightly know, huge benefits that come from using digital platforms to deliver service to citizens in a much better way. And we've seen it in other parts of the world. But there needs to be, frankly, and this is the thing, it's easy to blame the tech, but it's not always about tech. It's about people and the way they use tech and the way they view tech. Often we'll think that it's, what's gone on has been some sort of platform that's been ill-advised. It's been ill-advised to choose and to run with. But I actually think in many of the cases, these are governance arrangements. The leadership that backs the projects, that maintains an active interest, not a fleeting announcement-based interest, but an ongoing one, and backs it up with budgets that are realistic is very important. And that's why I think in terms of government as leader, this will be crucial. And why I think when I said, as much as it's about getting board members and senior management digitally literate, it's also not just the case that we leave this to secretaries, first assistant secretaries and project teams within the public service. The people within a federal cabinet need to recognise that this will be crucial in terms of the way their departments run in the future, that their engagement with this is going to be vital, and that they need to be across these key issues and not have the wax and wane interest in these projects as you move forward. So that's why I think the ACS can also play an important role in encouraging, and I think your engagement is crucial with both sides of politics, the way that you've, and I've certainly noticed in the last 12 months the engagement really ramp up from the ACS, and I think that is important because you actually, I know you'll be used to politicians talking things up, but I actually think the ACS has a very vital role in getting politicians to think about this more because of the economic and social benefits that flow from getting this right. And finally, in terms of the region, I mentioned the future of work earlier and the impact of automation. Here is a staggering statistic. The International Labour Organization says that five Southeast Asian countries, the impact of automation on those countries will have an effect on 137 million people in those countries. This is a huge number. And so they have a vested interest. They have a burning interest in making sure that they get things right. I'm going to Singapore in November and meeting up with a number of people within government there, but in particular to hear what they're doing with respect to, when it comes to the future of work and skills development, the type of approaches that they have to deal with the second cohort that's affected by the impact of automation and workplace change. There's one cohort, the next generation, which we think about a lot, and we can make changes to the way in which they get skills. There's another cohort that are retired, but who still want to maintain an engagement with the workforce. We still have to work out what's happening in terms of refreshing skills there. But the cohort in the middle that's caught by automation whilst actively in the workforce, how do we refresh skills there? And we talked a lot in the past about lifelong learning, but we actually have to do it now. And how do we do it? The Singaporeans have a system, for example, of providing credits that people accrue that they can then use in terms of applying it in terms of building up their own skills base as adults in the workforce. And they're encouraged so that the cost is not a factor, that they can actually apply that in a way of refreshing their skills base. These are the type of things I'll be interested in. But when you look at Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, who all are actively considering what they are doing in terms of tech and early stage innovation, and they are replete with human capital. And you look at our nation, a financial services hub, driven with the fourth largest savings pool on the planet. We have a strong capital base, and they have strong human capital, and they have an interest in trying to work out, when they look either at China or they look at the US, what they do in their own way. ASEAN, 600 million people strong, very keen to work out how they will grow in terms of that part of the region. And don't for 1 minute think I've forgotten about the other powerhouse in tech, which is India. But they will grow of their own. The dynamism and the momentum in that nation will keep propelling that nation forward. But there are these nations right at our doorstep that I think we've completely neglected with respect to digital engagement at a diplomatic level, and that we should be working closely with. And this is one thing that I think we also need to progress. So while I'm not rolling out policy, I am signalling in terms of those areas that I mentioned tonight, our keen interest, those areas in terms of what happens to people as employees affected by change, what happens when businesses drag the chain, small and large, the role of government in providing a leadership, an example in terms of leadership, but also championing the case at a national level, and also collaborating within our region. These are important things that do need to be pursued. I'll leave a lot of my other, I'm more than happy to answer questions that might be here, but I just did want to also thank again the ACS. Thank you so much, Anthony, and the leadership team for allowing me the opportunity to spend some time with you. I also think it's important as well that when we think about tech and skilling up and the growth that can occur as a result of the application, particularly within early stage innovation and creating new firms that will create new jobs, that we think a lot about Western Sydney, and that innovation and this type of change is not going to be restricted just to the laneways of the inner city, but this is something that we can do either within suburban Australia and regional Australia, like the work you're doing in the Northern Territory in terms of WA's interest in it, and others as well who want to change their economies. Again, the ACS is playing an important advocacy role there. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Stay. We're going to have question time. So I'm going to introduce the Vice President, Johan Ramasundara, who will be taking the questions from the floor for the Shadow Minister. Before I do that, I'd just like to do a brief intro. Our Vice President is based in Canberra, and he's just flown in today. He just came back from the Silicon Valley. He was on a sabbatical to Austrade and was working on our landing pad in San Francisco. So he's sabbatical from IP Australia. He's a board director of governance there. So welcome back, and I'll get you to take questions for the Shadow Minister.
Do you bring any souvenirs? iPhone 10?
In my bag.
Okay. I like this man already.
Thank you very much, Anthony. So before I open up the floor for questions, and in order to maximise and we make sure that we make the most of the question and answer time, we'll offer one question per person, and keep your questions very brief and to the point. Put your hand up and please specify where you're from, who you're representing, what your name is, and then we will go from there. And there's 2 roving mics at the back, and we'll take questions now to the Minister. The gentleman at the front there.
Hi. Yeah, this sounds like a sparrow somewhere.
Yeah. You ask the question and I'll listen.
Yeah, Jeff Hayden is my name from the IoT Alliance.
Hi, Jeff.
And I'm very Australia has a long history of being a fast follower and a culture of being a fast follower. In the digital economy, fast following is coming second means coming last. And I wondered how you might see that cultural shift with both industry and government, because it seems so fundamental to the digital economy.
Yeah, and in terms of IoT, and you were saying you spent some time in the States, not this year, the year before, spent time with GE, who are reinventing themselves, particularly pushing the case about the industrial internet, but doing what, from an IoT perspective, you've already been giving a lot of thought to, which is, using tech in a way that can deliver through the data that's generated huge efficiencies in the way in which businesses are run. And they've been thinking about that well in advance. And I know there's been some moves here in terms of the IoT Association of Australia, who are now trying to argue the case, particularly to government, about getting ahead and starting to think about what can be done here. But a lot of this is, as you rightly say, something, or if I can draw from your comments, should I say, that we should be thinking about, particularly from a business perspective and a corporate perspective. And again, this is what, when I was talking about digital literacy, or going to, making the case about how much businesses are actually investing in technological change, I press on that case, and I do, rib corporate Australia on it for the very reasons that you're saying. That, as a follower, we then have to play catch up and see if we'll get the same type of advantages conferred on us. And it's too late, because by the time we've caught up, they've actually evolved, our competitors have evolved to the next stage in terms of what they can do, as is often the case. And so I do think, and again, this is why I think the broader discussion around innovation, future of work, and the application of technology to improve the operations of business is so crucial. I actually, when I look at the stats with respect to venture capital and where it has moved, and I know this is quite a way away from what you're raising with me in terms of your question, but venture capital has grown from roughly 150 million to 500 million and could double with the right policies and the right infusion of capital. But a lot of that growth occurred recently. And my argument is that because of the talk that we did see through 2015 and early 16, that it actually validated and justified the risk, particularly of supporting early stage innovation in that small example. But in terms of what you've raised, having more and more people talk about the gains that are made for businesses in terms of embracing IoT is something that does need to, I don't know if it's Siri going off, which has happened during a media interview actually. And Siri told me to say it shorter. But I do think that is an issue, and we do need to keep, slapping the face of the water to get people focused on we'll get close to 10,000 new homes right in the electorate I represent. And I said, how long? And they said, oh, about 3 to 5 years. Like it was just, yeah, we'll do that and we'll move on to the next thing. A lot of jobs in that, but then I thought of one of the worst things people say to you is, you're as useful as a one-armed bricklayer. I've actually seen the one-armed bricklayer. It's a robot developed here in Australia from Fast Brick Robotics in Perth that have now developed a machine, the Hadrian X, that has actually got support from Caterpillar, tipped in 2 million with 8 million, an 8 million option. The Saudis have backed it and said, we will let you build 50,000 units by 2022. So they are going gangbusters. But what does that do for employment in my area? Well, what it does is it changes the skills demands. But how do we prepare for it? Through schools, TAFEs and universities. And again, I want to see that we're not just a labour force, but that we're creating innovative new firms in our area that are drawing on those skills as well. So manufacturing is an important part, but I want to be able to see, particularly in a movement-constrained city that Sydney has become, if I can put it that way, that we do see economic development devolve. And we actually, again, this is something that we talked about a lot, but we've now got the opportunity, the pressure to do so. But also if we get things like, dare I say, the NBN right, having a platform where data is the new oil in an economy, and being able to see through the application of skill, business investment, active advocacy by government, that we see new sectors emerge in Western Sydney, so that I've got something that I can see for young students in my area that they've got a job to go to. And which is why, for example, I actively, there are 30 schools in my area that are engaging in STEM studies, not at secondary, at primary level, and encouraging an interest in science and tech early on, and visited them recently, and I'm supporting those schools in our area. That's the type of stuff that needs to happen. And I think, again, like when we're talking about this and championing this more, and it's become the DNA of local representatives to argue, and it's embedded within there, I think is a very important thing to happen.
So one last question.
We actually have a question has come through from our live stream.
Oh, excellent.
Yes. So this is not me asking you. Ed, this one comes to us from Chris in Darlington.
Chris in Darlington.
What will you do about fixing government IT and returning institutional knowledge to the APS after years of efficiency dividends?
Yes. So we actually argued earlier this year that the government, with all the problems that they had with digital transformation, that they should undertake what we did when we got into government in 2008. We got Peter Gershon in to basically look at ICT and the way that government manages it and help drive the way that activity is managed within government. And the government didn't want to do that. They placed more faith in reviewing the projects that were over, I think it was $10 million that were in the pipeline, and that they would look at how those were likely to be managed rather than learning from the errors or the problems that they've experienced. When they didn't do that, we argued the case then, after 6 months, that we would initiate a Senate inquiry into digital transformation. That's now happening, being chaired by Senator Jenny McAllister, which we are looking at not from the perspective of finger pointing, but actually learning about what needs to happen, having a much more transparent and honest take on what's happened with digital transformation, so that we can do exactly what Chris from Darlington's asked us, which is, well, what are you going to do? Well, we want to be able to learn off an evidence base what needs to be done. Our commitment is solid about the value of digital transformation, as I said in my contribution earlier, to helping citizens get access to government better. But that's one. The second is, to their credit, the government has Angus Taylor, as much as I give him grief on a lot of other things, I'll give him credit on this, where they did open the doors to bring in more talent for the very reason that was argued a few moments ago, which is the depletion of that talent, in particularly from tech talent, ICT. They are now looking to try and bring people into departments. That is a good first step. I am concerned they drove a lot of talent out of organs like the the DTA, and I am concerned about the fact that the delivery focus of the DTA has been drained, and that is much more of a, I would argue, an audit focus or a policy and governance focus, which, while important, can't be the single role of the DTA to just basically look at proposals that are being put forward. I think they have a delivery focus themselves, but I do think it's good that they're thinking about replenishing. The question is, how successful will that actually be?
Well, that concludes all the formal question and answer session, but the ministers...
Bloke in the back. There's this man down the back who wanted to, yes, your good self, who wanted to ask a question. Can I... You look like you were right from the get-go wanting to ask me a question, so fire away. I'm sorry to take over like that.
No, not a problem.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Dave Allen. I've been doing IT and innovation all my life, private person, independent, and I'm seeing our mathematics standards dropping. And I ran my concerns past the chief economist from one of our major banks just 2 weeks ago, talking to property developers, and he said, unless we turn our mathematics standards around, he said the future for our education, which is one of our major industries, is chilling. How can we actually start the process of getting this dialogue, which you're talking about, excellent, and whatever, how can we start the process, and how can we start turning our mathematics standards around? Thank you.
And I had a gut feeling, based on your enthusiasm, Dave, that you may have dropped something off to my office today on this very same subject. So I just had this feeling, which I think Julie knows, in a crowd, being able to read a crowd is, a skill that takes a while to learn, but hopefully I'll apply it correctly in saying I don't have an answer for you. Even though you obviously put that to me, I don't have an immediate one. I want to be something radical as a politician and not pretend I know an answer when I don't. But I do think that the focus, particularly, well, what you're talking about is the quality of maths teaching.
Oh, perhaps, yes. Or just the fact that we're not actually teaching mathematics to
Yeah.
students.
Yeah, and also the fact that the number of STEM students in this country is nowhere near what we should be comfortable with. I think is important. So that is something, and we did want to address this more, particularly early on. What we took to the last election was a policy, especially to get more teachers, especially in the secondary level and potentially primary, engaging more in this area. Some of those schools that I mentioned to you, particularly the primary schools, engaging in very practical ways to excite children in science and technology, who they themselves, through professional development, are dedicating time outside of their usual schooling, will take themselves out for professional development so that they can improve the quality of their teaching. Not necessarily in the maths angle that you're very focused and concentrated on, but I think is an important first step. The other thing I think we need to stop reaching for as the go-to every time we think about how we're going to get our kids ready for the jobs of the future. We did it a lot ourselves, but everyone keeps going, when we code, when we get all these kids to learn how to code, bingo, everything's going to be safe. And I just don't have the heart to say to some of my colleagues, artificial intelligence and machine learning, what that will do in terms of software development down the track means coding's good to know, but it's not going to be the safety hatch you all make it out to be. Some say it's good to know coding in the future, sure, but I drive a car without knowing how it actually works. I'm not saying that's exactly the same parallel here, but that will be done in a particularly different way. I do think we need to focus on skill set development, particularly around problem solving, particularly around creativity. The focus of broadening out STEM to STEAM, as is often argued, should be taking greater prominence as well. I am also worried about that too, insofar as once with respect to AI, everyone says, well, AI will be good at churning analysis and just going through data and levering off that. I'll tell you what, once empathy is built into AI, what will that do to jobs? And that is a longer term thing to think about too. One of the books that left a really deep impression on me, Martin Ford's Rise of the Robots, talking about AI and robotics used in treating people with PSTD. And when they measured the reception by the patients of who they thought did better, humans or the robots, I'm just going to leave that with you to think about. So this whole belief that, AI, it'll be fine, it'll just deal with all this stuff, because we're human and because we have these feelings and because they can't be creative, we'll be right, even though there's now software and robots that are doing their own paintings or composing their own music, means that we should not be so arrogant to think that some of these things that you've raised can just be left alone. It is a big challenge longer term, which I think deserves more and more thought. And that's it. I'm not going to hijack that.
Thank you very much, Shadow Minister. Could we please get together in thanking the Shadow Minister for this evening?
Thank you.
And a little gesture of thank you from the ACS. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us.
iPhone 10. It's an iPhone 10.
Before we close, I'd just like to say a couple quick words. Thank you for coming here, especially to Parramatta. And the Shadow Minister mentioned about our role in the ACS and the critical role that we play. And so on November 2, I'd like you to come to the Star for our Reimagination Summit, because we'll be launching the next chapter of our history book, which we launched in the National Library on Monday. It's called A Splendid Vision, the History of Computing in Australia. The next chapter is about the future of ACS that we've been working in the last 18 months. And I'll give you a tip. It has 3 C's in it, and the last C is about catalyst. It's a catalyst that the role ACS play, not just for our members, but for industry, government, and our community. So there was a catalyst element, which is the role we play, the 22,000 members that we have across Australia and 1,000 overseas, and the role we play to guide and help our governments, because we are the technologists. We're working on the technology. We've got the frontier of AI, blockchain, IoT, you name it, we are in it. So it's time that we actually share those knowledge with the community, with the industry and the government. So I'd just like to quickly respond to that. So I look forward to see you all 2nd November, put that in your calendar. It's an important time, but because that's going to be the reshape of the ACS as we move forward. So thank you, Shadow Minister, again.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Julie, and please stay for drinks and some food after. I'd also like to thank our staff who worked tirelessly to pull this all together, Rock and his team, and Sylvia and her team to here today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Testing ideas and sharing with each other, people are the drivers of innovation, is a really important aspect of what today is all about.
This technological advancement, this presents challenges to some category of worker. And over again, we're seeing that the workers who are facing the greatest challenge are those right there in the middle.
Trying to convince both my cabinet colleagues, but to then drive the change through the bureaucracy was a very significant challenge.
It's about using the power of the machine that you have, keeping it efficient, making sure that your board is right, making sure that your executive management is right, and making sure that all of the talent that sits underneath that is also right.